Thank you so much for joining us, Talal. If you could just tell us a bit, about your background, so your research, what your work is in this kind of digital rights space, and just if you can speak on any of your professional knowledge as well.
Sure, Anna, thank you for the opportunity. So I've been active in the digital rights and digital policy space for almost a decade, particularly from South Asia region. I started off my professional career as a journalist, but even then I was closely following developments on social media, particularly on the back of Arab Spring that happened in 2011. Um, and my interest is in this area grew over time when some developments began to take place in South Asia region. And then eventually I took me to the civil society space in Pakistan, where I began to work for civil society organizations that primarily focused on digital rights. Um, then, as I joined a diplomatic mission for my work on political engagements, even though I was solely focused on political engagements and helping the mission develop better relationships with political stakeholders, one major theme that I still remained in touch with was how internet was playing out, what internet rights mean for Pakistanis and for South Asians. And as of now, I'm currently consulting with a digital rights organization and helping them design a strategic plan for their work, for the regional work on digital rights. So very much engaged and involved with the digital rights space, and have had the opportunity to work not only with civil society organizations, but also with governments. And also, I've also had the opportunity to speak with industry as well on some thorny digital rights issues.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, really keen to hear more about your work in the digital rights space. So, our next question is, what do you perceive is the biggest hindrance or roadblock in your problem space of digital rights? What is the most pressing issue that comes to your mind when we talk about this topic?
So coming from global south, digital rights mean slightly different to how people perceive digital rights in, for instance, Australia. We are still struggling with issues of internet access in our part of the world. There are parts of the country who do not have access to even 2G or 3G. And I'm sure it is the same for many other parts of South Asia. So access to internet is the biggest issue. What that means is that when you don't have access to internet across the country, people in that part of the country are unable to avail educational opportunities. They are unable to explore the field of IT and essentially contribute to the digital economy. But more than that, I think it basically means that that part of the country is not part of your digital economy story. So I think that's basically one of the biggest challenges that countries like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh face in terms of digital rights. On the next other issues that are of concern to digital rights advocates, not to people at large, is privacy rights. So pretty much in every country across South Asia, privacy is mentioned and referenced in the constitution. But it was envisioned from a more traditional perspective when the campaign around digital rights picked up pace over the past 10 years. A lot of digital rights activists started talking about privacy rights in the digital space. But after having seen the work of more, digital rights advocates over the years, I think we're still quite far away from a space where people in South Asia would really understand the concept of digital privacy in digital space. I think I was reading an article a week ago that basically said that less than 10% of the people really care about privacy. And a lot of them are not even aware of what that means, how data is being processed, and what it means if the data is available on a darknet as a result of a data breach. So I think we're quite far away from that part of digital rights, but access to internet is something that everyone perhaps recognizes widely.
Yeah, great, thank you. And just kind of on that, you said access to the internet is a clear gap. What do you think an ideal digital world or digital space would look like, specifically in the global south? And is there anything that, platforms or governments or stakeholders are doing well currently, or, how might they improve in this aspect?
Sure. So World Bank has done multiple studies in the African region, and they've also tried to explain how the increase in internet penetration actually positively correlates with increase in the GDP of a particular country or region. If I'm not wrong, I think there was a report that said that um, um, uh, I think a 2% internet increase in internet penetration perhaps contributes perhaps to 10% more to the GDP. I don't know to get the figures right, but essentially they positively correlated GDP with access to internet and increase in internet penetration. So I think the ideal world from a global south perspective would be where everyone has access to internet. And more than that, everyone has access to cheaper internet, because there are countries, I'm sure, where internet is expensive or people are unable to afford it. I think countries like Pakistan are privileged in a sense where I think it's relatively cheaper to afford a 4G, a 2G, 3G connection. But even then, um, I'm sure there are affordability issues in Pakistan as well. So I think the ideal world would be a space where everyone has access to internet and people are able to afford it, and are able to contribute to digital economy and sustain themselves. As far as your question around what governments and platforms are doing, I think it's really complex. It's a very complicated question because the perception in the global south is that platforms have entirely different SOPs for the global north. And they do not apply those same rules to issues that the global south are facing, particularly around elections integrity, around the takedown of harmful content. We've had colleagues who have been complaining for long about how some platforms have stopped paying attention to requests for content takedown that could potentially end someone's life, basically. And we were in a space 5 years ago where social media companies came forward, reached out to civil society organizations and asked them to work with them as their trusted partners and set up escalation channels. But as of now, those escalation channels are pretty much dead, or they are not super responsive. So I think there is a discrepancy in how platforms adhere to rules in the global north versus how they adhere to rules in the global south. When it comes to governments, I don't think I will be able to comment specifically on every South Asian country, but my understanding is that over the period of time, states are trying to find ways to exercise more control over the internet. And I think there are some genuine concerns around how disinformation comes into play, how some political leaders go through face smear campaigns, and platforms are unable to effectively do something about those smear campaigns. There are some genuine concerns there, but I think the state's response to those problems is relatively regressive, and they're trying to find ways to exercise more control over the internet. And they're trying different techniques, bringing in new laws, such as forcing social media companies to move towards data localization, binding them through regulatory mechanisms to open up their offices, set up data centers, and in a way facilitate them on data access requests whenever they can. So I think that is really problematic. We had a consultation in South Asia a couple of weeks ago from one of the industry leaders around data localization, and they tried to explain on how setting up data centers in countries like Pakistan might not be a technically correct solution because we don't have the skills in the market in the first place. And then the cybersecurity landscape is not super strong, and economically it won't be viable for any company like Meta or Google to set up their data centers, because it is going to it's not technically correct to open up data centers in countries like Pakistan. So they presented a report and obviously explained how this would be a problem. So I think these are the sort of issues that we are dealing with in the global south. Regressive legislation coupled with lack of accountability on the part of platforms.
Thank you so much for that. As part of this series, we want to be able to translate more of the academic terms to a more digestible piece of information. So we know that your area of expertise is around digital rights and digital authoritarianism as well. You mentioned political disinformation. Are you able to explain the effects of political disinformation and the lack of individual empowerment in digital spaces, and what that might mean for someone when they interact with digital technologies or social media platforms or the internet? What does that look like in Pakistan or the global south?
I think a lot has been written about how political disinformation can have an effect on a particular individual. My understanding is that political disinformation in our part of the world can be life-threatening at some level. But more than that, it sort of tarnishes the reputation of an individual, and there is no recourse to rectify that. We have had instances where particular journalist was targeted through a disinformation campaign. I think it's very easy to brand someone as anti-state or anti-national, but you come up with these unknown accounts. They start targeting an individual. Come up with doctored videos on some occasions. And all of those videos or allegations might be fake, but there is no way to hold the people responsible for them accountable, because the defamation laws are not strong, and then obviously even obviously people in power are struggling to get hold of seek justice from, or they're struggling to get hold of or resolve this issue. So I think it just brings me back to the point earlier about how obviously there are some general concerns around how platforms are unable to rectify the situation quickly, but also it's also difficult for the governments to find out the right balance between allowing internet freedom, but also making sure that those harms are not spreading widely, not only just against state actors, but also against civil society members. So I think that's basically a challenge. I would shy away from claiming that disinformation has particularly led to someone's death, because I think there is no clear link between the two. So I will have to come back to you on this again, maybe, and see what are the particular effects that we have seen. But I think generally speaking, polarization has definitely increased as a result of the harmful content that has been spreading online. And I think we have sort of moved into these echo chambers where someone who is supporting a particular political party would believe their narrative without questioning their side of the story. So I think that's really problematic. We don't even know how disinformation is spreading through apps like WhatsApp, because they're end-to-end encrypted. So on platforms, you can see some content, which is out there, but we don't know how, the content which is downloaded from WhatsApp, from Twitter, or from Facebook is being shared through WhatsApp messages. So I think that's also really problematic as well. And I don't think in those out, the culture of verifying information is very strong. Probably I think it's the same for people across the globe. I think that's basically a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to go back to your point you made about kind of holding social media companies accountable. Since you're a digital rights expert, how important do you think digital rights are, seeing as we're in this kind of digital era? And how can we ensure that big tech companies are held accountable for actually protecting the rights and well-being of their users? Is this possible at some stage, do you think?
I think engagement is the key in the first place. And I think social media companies did a good job in being forthcoming years ago. And they reached out to civil society organizations. Um, I think they also set up escalation channels. But obviously, we are in a space where, X fired their integrity team after the recent takeover by Elon Musk. And I think it's an ongoing conversation that one needs to have with platforms. I don't think we will ever be able to arrive at a space where they will be where we will be able to get whatever the civil society organizations are pushing for. But I think there is a need to have more focused conversation with platforms about the sort of harms that the content that's available to the audience is causing in the society. And I think from the civil society's perspective, I think the first thing is to document how those harms are playing out in society. I have not come across a lot of reports where social media companies are provided documentary evidence. So I think that would be the first step to have any conversation about how things have evolved and how we need to come up with a new strategy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Talal. Those are all our questions for this interview. We really appreciate your time and best of luck with your new role. And we really hope to hear more about your research and all your findings as well. So thank you.